Today we're going to be showcasing an interrupt using this circuit. Our program is already uploaded to our Arduino. Right now the relay is just switching from left to right, turning on and off. When we trigger our interrupt, it should stop it, or turn off the relay and wait for 2 seconds on the red LED. Oh, here, give me a sec. There we go. Sorry, the button sometimes comes off a little bit. But the way our interrupt works is at any time when you trigger it, it should stop the relay at any time for 2 seconds and then go back to its main loop, which is just a switch back and forth. Like so. To do that, we use pins 2. You can use pins 2 and 3 for interrupts. If you're going to use pins 2 and 3, you have to make sure that when you're writing your code, you have used the right numbers, which will be 0 and 1. If you're using pin 2, it has to be the number 0. If you're using pin 3, it has to be the number 1. You cannot change the numbers. They have to be the right numbers, otherwise the code will not work. How we did this is we used the code over here. In our first 3 lines, we have our variables. We have our relay set at port 8. We have our button at port 2. We have our variable for our interrupt, which is just interrupt flag. We're going to be using a flag because our delay time was a little too high, and the interrupt service routine kept getting stuck in a loop. So we would trigger the interrupt and it would just not break it. It would just not break the loop. So we're going to be using a flag so that the interrupt service routine knows that we're triggering an interrupt, and then we're going to make it so that it resets, so that it basically handles it and then breaks out of it, so that we can go back to the main code. In our void setup, we have our outputs and our inputs. Our relay is going to be our output, and our button is going to be our input. For our button though, we use the input pull-up. This will make it so that our input basically starts at 5 volts. We did this because we are looking for a falling change. Basically, we want it to be at 5 volts and then fall to 0 volts so that it can trigger the interrupt. For our attach interrupt, we're going to be using 0. We're going to be using the number 0 because we're using pin 2. Like I said, if you're using pin 2, you have to use the number 0. If you're using pin 3, you have to use the number 1. So you're going to want to use the number and then the function or the name of the interrupt. And then we're going to be looking for a falling. So we're going to want the button to go from 5 volts to 0. Here, let's explain our interrupt first. So our interrupt function is just going to be called flip, would flip. And we're going to set it to, we're going to set our interrupt flag variable to true here. So when you click the button, it'll set it to true. When we go back to our main loop here though, if here it checks for the interrupt flag. If the interrupt flag is set, or if the button is clicked, then it'll make it so that the relay turns off and then waits for 2 seconds. So it'll stop the switching back and forth. And then finally, it'll set the interrupt flag or our variable back to false. So it'll only set it to true when you click the button or when you trigger it. Anything else other than that, it'll just stay in the main loop, which is just to turn on the relay, wait half a second, turn off the relay, and then wait half a second. Yep, and that's the video.